He locked the door like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that instant, I realized my heart was a goddamn traitor, because it leapt at the sound of that click. The office smelled like stale coffee and cheap printer ink. Yet somehow it became the most dangerous place I had ever been. Daniel me straight. Perfect coworker with his rolled-up sleeves and careless smirk stood between me and the only exit. And maybe, just maybe, between me and the version of myself I had been pretending to be for too long. I should start at the beginning. But beginnings are never neat, are they? They're messy, awkward, sometimes humiliating. Mine began 6 months ago, when I transferred from Chicago to our firm's Manhattan branch. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to reinvent myself, bury the ghosts of a failed relationship, and throw myself into work. I didn't plan on Daniel. Daniel was the kind of guy everyone noticed, confident without trying, attractive without knowing, the kind of man who could say something stupid in a meeting and somehow make it sound brilliant. He had this laugh loud, unrestrained, completely unprofessional that made people lean toward him just to hear it again. And me, I was the quiet one, the dependable guy, the one who kept his head down, did his work, smiled politely. I thought I was invisible. But Daniel noticed me. He noticed the little things, like how I always skipped lunch but lived on granola bars, how I stayed late, long after everyone else had left, how I straightened the stacks of paper in the copy room when I was nervous. He noticed and then he teased me for it, in that harmless way that made everyone laugh. Everyone but me. Because what they didn't know was that every time Daniel leaned against my desk, close enough that his cologne blurred my thoughts, I wanted things I wasn't supposed to want, things I couldn't even say out loud. He was straight. He dated women, kissed them openly at office parties, showed me pictures on his phone like it was the most casual thing in the world. And I hated myself for the jealousy that burned through me like acid. The night everything changed. The office was nearly empty. Rain streaked the windows, the kind of relentless New York downpour that turned streets into rivers. I was finishing a presentation, trying to ignore the way my computer hummed like a tired heart. Daniel appeared at my desk, dripping wet, shirt clinging to his chest. He grinned. "You're still here. What? No life outside of Excel?" I rolled my eyes, trying to keep my voice steady. Somebody has to make sure tomorrow doesn't implode. He laughed, shaking his head like I was some ridiculous but endearing mystery. "You kill me, man. Come on. Let's get out of here. Drinks on me." And I almost said yes. God, I wanted to. But the fear was louder. Fear of what I might say if I had a drink in me. Fear of what he might see in my eyes. So I lied. "Can't. I'm almost done." He studied me for a beat too long, then shrugged and walked off. But not before he muttered, almost to himself, "One of these days, you'll surprise me." I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the end. A week later, the project from hell landed on our team, and Daniel and I were assigned to it together. Long nights, too much caffeine, endless bickering over fonts and phrasing. Somewhere between frustration and exhaustion, something shifted. He stopped calling me robot and started calling me partner. He started bringing me coffee without asking how I liked it, just knew. He started looking at me in ways that made my chest tighten, like maybe he saw more than I wanted him to. And then came the night. The night he walked into the office, closed the door, and everything I thought I knew tilted on its axis. I had stayed late again, finishing edits. The office was dark except for the desk lamp. I didn't hear him at first, not until the door clicked shut. I looked up and there he was, leaning against the door, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "You ever get tired of pretending?" he asked. I blinked. Pretending what? That you don't care. About anything. About me. The silence was sharp enough to cut. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to laugh it off. Make some sarcastic comment. But the words stuck in my throat. Daniel crossed the room. Slow. Deliberate. My pulse screamed. Daniel. I started. But my voice cracked. He stopped in front of me. Close enough that I could see the raindrops still clinging to his hair. His eyes softened. I'm not blind. You know. I see the way you look at me. My blood ran cold. You know. You've got it wrong. But then his hand brushed mine. Just the lightest touch. Like testing a flame. And I realized the worst part wasn't that he knew. The worst part was that I didn't want to pull away. You think you're the only one who's scared. He whispered. And that's when the ground beneath me disappeared. Daniel's words hung in the air. Heavy and impossible. I stared at him. Every rational part of me screaming to step back. To laugh it off. To pretend this wasn't happening. But my body betrayed me. My hand trembled where his touched mine. And I couldn't bring myself to move. You're not making sense. I finally managed. My voice barely above a whisper. His gaze locked on mine. Unflinching. I think I'm making perfect sense. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me right then. In the middle of the office with the storm raging outside. My heart leapt into my throat. Both terrified and desperate. But instead, he leaned closer. So close his breath ghosted across my cheek. And said, I've been trying to ignore it. Pretend it's just me imagining things. But every time you look at me, it doesn't feel like imagination. I swallowed hard. My chest aching. Daniel, you're straight. He laughed bitterly, stepping back just enough to run a hand through his hair. That's what everyone thinks, right? Hell, is what I thought. But then you showed up. I shook my head, unable to process. Don't say that. Don't mess with me like this. I'm not messing with you. He shot back, his voice raw. Do you think I'd risk everything me job? My reputation? Whatever the hell this I just to screw around? No, man. He trailed off, jaw tight, like the words were fighting their way out of him. I can't stop thinking about you. And it's driving me insane. The room spun. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. For months, I had built this wall around myself, convinced that wanting him was just another cruel trick life played on me. But now the wall was crumbling, and all I could see was him. I pushed back from my chair, standing so fast it nearly toppled. You don't know what you're saying. You're confused. Confused. He echoed, his eyes flashing. You think I haven't spent nights tearing myself apart over this. You think I haven't tried to convince myself it's just some stupid phase. But every damn time I see you, every time you laugh or even just breathe near me, I feel it. And I don't want to run from it anymore. His honesty was a knife, cutting through every defense I had left. My breath came uneven, my chest tight. Daniel, this can't happen. Why not? Because it'll ruin everything. You don't know what it's like being on the outside, being the joke, the target. I've lived through it. And you have no idea what you'd be giving up. His expression softened, but his eyes burned with determination. Maybe I don't, but I know what I'd regret more, walking away from the only thing that's ever felt real. I stared at him, my heart breaking under the weight of his words. And then, before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. Our lips met like the crash of a wave, sudden, violent, unstoppable. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was years of silence, months of longing, weeks of denial, all exploding in one reckless moment. Daniel's hands gripped my waist. pulling me closer, and I melted against him, my body betraying every ounce of fear. His mouth was warm, urgent, desperate, like he'd been starving and finally found what he needed. I clutched at his shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my fingers. Proof that this was real, that I wasn't dreaming. When we finally pulled apart, gasping for air, he rested his forehead against mine. "Tell me I'm wrong," he whispered. "Tell me you don't feel it too." Couldn't. God help me. Couldn't. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the truth slip out. I felt it since the day we met. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was electric. Daniel's breath hitched, and when I opened my eyes, his smile was shaky, almost disbelieving. "Then don't push me away. Not this time." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to throw myself into him and never look back. But fear clung to me like chains. "You don't know what you're asking," I murmured. "It's not just about us. People will find out. They'll talk. They'll treat you differently. And when they do, you'll resent me for it." He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Let them talk. I don't care. All I care about is you." Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You think that now. But what about in a month? A year? What happens when it gets hard?" "Then we fight," he said firmly. "Together." And God, I wanted to believe him. The rain outside pounded harder, like the world itself was holding its breath. For a moment, it felt like nothing existed beyond that office. Just me, him, and the impossible truth we had both been too afraid to face. I didn't have an answer. Not then. So I did the only thing I could. I kissed him again. Softer this time. Slower. Like a promise instead of a plea. The days that followed were a blur. We didn't talk about what happened. Not really. But everything had changed. His touches lingered longer than before. His jokes carried a weight they hadn't before. When our eyes met across the conference table, the air between us hummed with unspoken words. But in private, it was different. Late nights at the office became hours. Stolen moments in the elevator, in the stairwell, in the shadows where no one would see. We laughed too loudly, touched too often, loved too fiercely in the silence of empty hallways. And with every kiss, every whispered confession, my fear grew. Because love like this, the kind that bloomed in secret, in the cracks of who we were supposed to be, was fragile. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the world found a way to break it. The first crack came sooner than I expected. One evening, as we left the building together, Daniel's arm brushed mine, casual but lingering. A coworker, Megan from accounting, caught it. She raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Since when are you two joined at the hip?" she teased. Daniel laughed it off. Quick. Easy. But I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. And I knew, in that instant, that hiding would only get harder. The walls were closing in. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I replayed it all in my head: the kiss, the laughter, the way Daniel looked at me like I was the only person in the world. It should have been enough. It should have made me brave. But instead, it made me terrified. Because I wasn't just falling for him. I was already gone. And if this ended, if he changed his mind, if the world tore us apart, it wouldn't just break me. It would destroy me. Still, the next morning, when he showed up at my desk with coffee and that stupid grin, I couldn't resist. "Don't look at me like that," I muttered, trying to hide my smile. "Like what?" "Like you know something nobody else does." He leaned closer, his voice low. "That's because I do." And damn it, I let myself smile. For a while, that was enough. But nothing stays hidden forever. And when the storm finally came, it hit harder than either of us could have imagined. The storm didn't break with lightning. Came quietly, like a whisper at first. A rumor here, a sideways glance there. I noticed the shift before Daniel did. The way conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. The way certain coworkers suddenly had nothing to say to me but plenty to say about me once I left. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Paranoia, born from guilt and fear. But then came the look. One afternoon, I walked into the conference room for a meeting, and my manager Mitchell, 50-something, perpetually unimpressed, stared at me with this sharp, calculating expression. It lasted only a second before he smoothed it over. But the damage was done. Somebody knew. The meeting itself was a blur. Charts, numbers, projections, all meaningless noise under the pounding of my heart. I kept my eyes down, scribbling notes I'd never read again, while Daniel, sitting across the table, leaned back with that easy grin like the world wasn't on the verge of collapsing. Afterward, I pulled him aside. "We need to talk." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "Not here. Tonight." His smirk faded as he caught the seriousness in my tone. "Okay." That night, in my apartment, I told him everything. "They know," I said, pacing the floor. "Or at least they suspect. And if Mitchell suspects, it's only a matter of time before." "Before what?" Daniel interrupted, leaning against the counter like he had all the time in the world. "Before people talk. Before rumors spread. Who cares?" "I care." My voice cracked, louder than I meant it to. "You don't get it, Daniel. You can laugh it off. Act like it doesn't matter. But I've been the rumor. I've been the punchline. I've lost jobs, friends, family because of this. I can't go through that again. Not with you." His expression softened, but his eyes stayed steady on mine. "You think I don't care? You think I haven't thought about what this could mean for me? For us? I have. And I'm still here. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything," I whispered, my chest aching. "And that's what terrifies me." For the first time, he looked away, running a hand through his hair. "So what are you saying? That we should stop? Pretend none of this happened?" The words lodged in my throat. I wanted to say no, to tell him I'd rather burn than let him go. But the weight of the world was pressing down, and fear was louder than love. "I don't know," I admitted. He laughed, bitter and hollow. "That's not good enough." "I'm trying, Daniel. I'm trying to protect us." "No," he said sharply, his jaw tightening. "You're trying to protect yourself. And maybe that's fair. Maybe that's who you are, but don't act like you're doing it for me." The words cut deep because they were true, and I hated him for knowing me so well. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he grabbed his coat. "Call me when you figure out what you really want," he said, and then he was gone. The slam of the door echoed like a gunshot. The days after were unbearable. We still had to work together. Of course. Same office. Same project. Same endless hours of fake smiles and forced professionalism. But everything had changed. He stopped lingering by my desk. Stopped bringing me coffee. Stopped looking at me like I was the center of his universe. Instead, he laughed too loudly with others. Flirted too easily. Pretended too well. And it killed me. Because no matter how much I told myself I'd done the right thing, that this was safer, smarter, I couldn't erase the memory of his hands on me, his lips on mine, his voice whispering, "I see you." I was unraveling. One night, I stayed late again, unable to face the emptiness of my apartment. I buried myself in spreadsheets until my vision blurred. But the silence was unbearable. Every sound, the hum of the lights, the clatter of rain against the windows reminded me of him. I didn't notice he was there until I heard his laugh down the hall. He wasn't alone. Her name was Emily. She worked in marketing, bubbly and sweet, the kind of girl who wore bright colors in a sea of black suits. I peeked around the corner just in time to see her hand brush his arm. His grin wide and easy. It shouldn't have mattered. He was free to do whatever he wanted. But the sight of it ripped something open inside me. Something raw and ugly. I packed up my things and left before he could see me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with a truth I couldn't escape. I loved him, and I was losing him. The breaking point came a week later. Mitchell called me into his office. The blinds were drawn, the air heavy. He folded his hands on the desk and gave me that sharp, assessing look. "I'm going to be direct," he said. "There are concerns about your relationship with Daniel." My stomach dropped. Concerns. Perception matters in this business. If people believe personal matters are interfering with professional duties, it becomes a problem. For both of you. I forced my voice to stay calm. There's nothing inappropriate happening. His gaze was unrelenting. Good. Then it won't be an issue to keep it that way. Dismissed. Just like that. But the message was clear. If we were caught, if this became real, our careers would suffer. I walked out of his office shaking. Daniel was waiting near my desk, his eyes narrowing as he saw my face. What happened? Nothing. I lied, grabbing my bag. Don't give me that. Tell me. I hesitated. If I told him, he'd fight. He'd confront Mitchell, make a scene, refuse to hide. And that would only make things worse. So I said the only thing I could. We can't do this. Daniel. Not here. Not now. Maybe not ever. His face fell like I'd slapped him. You don't mean that. I do. For a long moment, he just stared at me, like he was trying to see past the words to the truth I couldn't admit. Finally, he nodded, his jaw tight. Fine, he said, his voice cold. If that's what you want. And then he walked away. This time, I knew he wouldn't come back. The weeks that followed were hell. I threw myself into work, pretended nothing was wrong, smiled when people asked about Daniel like my chest wasn't caving in. He, on the other hand, seemed perfectly fine. He joked. He laughed. He even started seeing Emily more often. And each time I saw them together, I died a little more inside. But the worst part wasn't the jealousy. It was the emptiness. Because when you've had something real even for a moment, going back to nothing feels unbearable. I wanted to hate him. To convince myself he'd been reckless, selfish, cruel. But late at night, when the world was quiet, all I could remember was the way he'd looked at me, like I was the only thing that mattered. And I hated myself more for letting it slip away. The breaking point came on a Friday. The office was buzzing with weekend energy. Everyone eager to escape. I was packing up when Daniel walked in. Late as usual. His tie loose and his grin sharp. Emily trailed behind him, laughing at something he said. I forced myself to look away. But then I heard it. I'll see you tonight, she asked. Her voice light, hopeful. Wouldn't miss it, he replied, his hand brushing hers. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my bag and stormed out, ignoring the way my coworkers glanced at me. I didn't care. I couldn't breathe in there. Not with him pretending I didn't exist. Not with her smiling at him like he was hers. Outside, the city air was cold, biting. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. And that's when I heard his voice. Hey. I turned, and there he was. Alone this time, his smile gone. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching. What do you want, Daniel? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. You, he said simply. The word hit me like a punch. But before I could answer, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. I can't do this anymore. Pretending I don't care. Pretending I don't love you. My breath caught. Don't say that. It's the truth. And suddenly, all the fear, all the anger, all the longing boiled over. I grabbed his shirt, pulling him close, and kissed him like it was the last thing I'd ever do. And for the first time in weeks, I felt alive. The kiss in the cold street should have felt like salvation. Instead, felt like surrender. Because even as his mouth pressed against mine, even as his hands gripped me like he'd never let go, reality was waiting just beyond the moment. The traffic roared. Pedestrians passed by. And somewhere, someone saw us. I knew it. I felt it in my bones. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against mine. I don't care who knows. I don't care what happens. I just want you. But I cared. God help me. I cared more than anything. And the world was about to remind me why. On Monday, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were stares. Pauses in conversation. Snickers when I walked past. Someone had seen us. Someone had talked. By lunch, it was everywhere. Did you hear about Daniel? And followed by a sharp glance in my direction. Apparently, they followed by a laugh. Kept my head down. Heart pounding. Shame clawing at my chest like an old, familiar monster. When I got back to my desk, Daniel was waiting. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was set tight. Come with me, he said. We ducked into a supply closet. Ridiculous and cliché, but it was the only place we could breathe. They know, I whispered, my voice breaking. So what? He shot back. So what? I echoed, incredulous. Daniel, this is our careers, our lives. People are already talking. Do you think Mitchell's going to ignore it? Do you think the partners are going to look at us the same way? He stepped closer, eyes burning. Let them look. Let them talk. I'm not ashamed of this. Of us. But I am. The words ripped out of me before I could stop them. The look on his face was worse than any rumor. Worse than any stare. He flinched like I'd struck him. I wanted to take it back. God. I wanted to swallow the words. To tell him I didn't mean it. But fear was louder than love. Just like always. He nodded slowly, his expression hardening into something I barely recognized. At least you're honest. And then he walked out. The fallout came fast. By Wednesday, Mitchell called me into his office again. The blinds were drawn, the air tense. I'll be blunt, he said. Your personal life has become a distraction. I need to know if this is going to affect your performance or Daniel's. I forced myself to stay steady. My work hasn't suffered. Maybe not yet. But perception matters. We can't afford unnecessary drama on this team. He leaned back, his gaze sharp. If you can't keep things professional, there will be consequences. I swallowed hard, nodding. Understood. Dismissed again. Just like that. When I walked out, Daniel was standing at the end of the hall, watching me. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. But the space between us had never felt wider. By Friday, Emily was at his desk, laughing, smiling, touching his arm. And he let her. I told myself it didn't matter, that maybe he was just trying to protect himself, to shift attention away. But when I saw them leave together that evening, her hand brushing his, my chest caved in. That night, I drank for the first time in months. Alone in my apartment, cheap whiskey burning my throat. I let the silence swallow me. I thought about the way he had looked at me that night in the rain. About the way his voice had broken when he said he loved me. About the way I'd thrown it all away with one reckless confession of shame. And I hated myself. Because the truth was simple. I wasn't ashamed of him. I was ashamed of me. The following week, things only got worse. A client dinner. Everyone was there. Suits, laughter, wine flowing freely. Daniel sat across from me, Emily beside him, her hand brushing his knee under the table. He laughed at something she said, the sound sharp and hollow. And I broke. Excusing myself, I fled to the bathroom, gripping the sink so hard my knuckles went white. My reflection stared back tired eyes, clenched jaw. A man who had everything to lose and nothing left to hide. The door opened. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Running away again. Daniel's voice was low, bitter. I closed my eyes. Don't do this here. Where then? In the office where people whisper. On the street where they stare. Or maybe in your apartment, where you can pretend none of this exists. I turned. Anger and heartbreak colliding. You think this is easy for me. You think I don't want you every second of every day. But wanting you doesn't erase the world we live in. He stepped closer, his eyes wild. Screw the world. It doesn't work like that. I shouted. You don't get it. Daniel. You've never had to fight just to exist. You've never lost everything because of who you are. I have. And I can't, my voice cracked. I can't survive losing you too. Silence. His chest rose and fell. His fists clenched at his sides. Finally, he whispered, You already lost me. And then he walked out. I stayed there long after the sound of his footsteps faded, staring at my reflection until I didn't recognize the man looking back. The days that followed were the worst of my life. Daniel stopped speaking to me entirely. Not a word. Not a glance. It was like I didn't exist. And maybe I didn't not to him. Not anymore. He was with Emily now. Everyone saw it. They went to lunch together. Left the office together. Laughed together in the break room. And every time I caught a glimpse, it was like a knife twisting deeper. I buried myself in work. Staying later than ever. Chasing exhaustion because it was the only thing that dulled the ache. My apartment became just 4 walls and a bed I couldn't sleep in. Nights blurred into mornings. Mornings into nights. Until I lost track of time. And still, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way his laugh used to sound when it was just for me. The way his hands used to hold me like I was something fragile and precious. The way he used to look at me, like I was the only thing in the world that made sense. I wanted to move on. I wanted to forget. But love doesn't vanish just because it's inconvenient. It lingers, stubborn and cruel, until it consumes you. And I was consumed. The final blow came 2 weeks later. I was called into HR. A complaint had been filed anonymous. Of course, about unprofessional behavior between Daniel and me. The meeting was short, clinical. They asked questions. I gave careful answers. Nothing inappropriate happened. We're colleagues. Nothing more. Lies I forced past my lips because the truth would destroy us both. When it was over, I walked out of that room feeling hollow, like a shell of myself. And there he was, waiting in the hallway. Our eyes met. For the first time in weeks, something cracked in his expression. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just pain. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to tell him everything I hadn't said, the truth. The fear. The love that hadn't gone anywhere. But my feet stayed rooted. He turned away first, and I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that I had just lost the love of my life. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds, the silence pressing in. I thought about calling him, about begging for one more chance, one more kiss, one more anything. But I didn't, because what right did I have? I'd chosen fear over love, and now I was alone, and maybe that was what I deserved. The office had never felt quieter, as if every wall and window held its breath, waiting for the truth to finally settle. I sat there with Ethan across from me, his face flushed, his tie loose, his eyes locked on mine with a vulnerability I had never seen in him before. "Do you realize what you've done to me?" he asked, his voice soft but trembling, like he was confessing to a crime he couldn't take back. I swallowed, my hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I didn't mean to do anything, Ethan. I just cared." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the problem, isn't it? You cared when nobody else did. And now I can't stop thinking about you, about what this means, about how much I've lied to myself." It was surreal, like hearing the words I had dreamt about whispered into existence. For months I had buried the way I looked at him, the way my chest ached when he brushed past me in the hallway or defended me during meetings. And now, he was admitting he felt something too, something dangerous and real. I leaned forward slowly, my voice low. "You don't have to lie anymore. Not to yourself. Not to me." Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenching on the desk. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, as if the weight was too much to bear, he dropped his head into his hands and exhaled shakily. "God, why does this feel like both the best and worst thing that's ever happened to me?" I reached across the desk and touched his hand. Just the barest brush of skin, but he jolted like electricity had shot through him. His eyes snapped to mine, wide, raw, desperate. And then, without warning, he surged forward and pressed his lips to mine. It wasn't careful. It wasn't neat. It was a collision of everything we'd been holding back: anger, longing, fear, relief. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood and pulled him closer, our mouths moving in a frantic, searching rhythm. For the first time, the office, the emails, the deadlines, the corporate mask didn't exist. It was just him and me. When he finally pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against mine, he whispered, "I can't lose you. Not now. Not after this." "You won't. I promised. Not if you're willing to fight for this with me." The weeks that followed were not easy. Rumors swirled around the office like storm clouds, colleagues whispering when Ethan and I walked into meetings together, their eyes lingering too long. There were days when I caught him withdrawing, his old mask slipping back on, as if he could still convince himself this wasn't real. But every night, behind closed doors, he unraveled in my arms. He'd hold me like I was the only steady thing in his life, whisper apologies into my neck, confess fears I had never imagined. And every time, I reminded him he didn't have to face them alone. The world outside wasn't kind. His family questioned him. His friends made jokes that stung too deep. One night, after a particularly brutal phone call with his father, he showed up at my apartment, drenched from the rain, shaking. "They'll never understand," he said, collapsing into me. "I'm so tired of pretending." I kissed his wet hair and whispered, "Then stop pretending. Be with me. Fully. No matter what it costs." And for the first time, I felt him say yes without words, his body pressed against mine, his heart sinking with mine in the dark. Months later, standing in the same office where everything began, we faced a different kind of battle. Our boss had called us in, his expression grave, the weight of company reputation heavy in the air. "I've heard the rumors," he said, "and I need to know, are they true?" Ethan and I exchanged a glance. For once, he didn't flinch. He took my hand openly, right there, and said, "Yes, they're true, and I won't apologize for it." The silence that followed was suffocating. But then, to my shock, our boss sighed. "What you do outside of work is your business. Just don't let it affect the team." Relief washed over me so strong my knees almost buckled. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized something had shifted. We weren't just hiding any more, we're building something real. Something worth the risks. The true test came not from the office, but from ourselves. Because loving someone isn't about stolen kisses in locked rooms, it's about facing the mornings when doubt creeps in. The nights when fear whispers in your ear. Ethan had his demons, and I had mine. There were arguments that left us both silent for days. Moments when I wondered if this was too hard, too heavy. But then he'd look at me with those eyes that once tried so hard to be unreadable, and I'd see the truth. He loved me. Not perfectly, not without fear, but deeply. And that was enough. One evening, a year after that first kiss, we returned to the office late. The building was empty, the city lights glowing through the tall windows. Ethan stood by the door, the same door he had locked that night, and smiled faintly. "Funny, isn't it?" he said. "How everything started here. How I walked in thinking I could keep pretending. And instead, I found you." I walked over, slipping my arms around his waist. "You didn't find me. You let yourself see me. And that changed everything." He kissed me slowly, gently, with none of the panic of that first night, just the certainty of love that had survived every storm. "I don't know what the future holds," he whispered, "but I know I want you in it." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him completely. Because love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it breaks down the door of your office, locks it behind you, and forces you to face the truth you've been running from. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, it gives you everything you never knew you needed. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.